Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact the show at twitter.com/DW Groovecast and through Facebook at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a monkey. Ain't a monkey.
Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Well, we get straightened out?
No, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Next.
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we're back again. We're in a new studio this week.
Yes, Chez Chaldon.
You know what? To be topical for the local folks here, I think we should call the studio Chopler Studios.
Okay. I'm not sharp enough and witty enough today to argue, so here we go. Chopler Studios.
Chopler Studios right here for Part B, Part 2.
We're still open.
I think, and also not to pull the curtain too far back and expose Oz, but we're using some new technology, some new microphones this week that could have come from Chopler Studios, right?
No doubt.
Yeah.
And just to make sure you jaded folk know, I'm well aware my overhead is nothing like Doppler's, so that may be part of why we're still open.
That could be. We're running a shoestring budget here, but you know, we're in the infancy of our podcast. But anyway, guys, yeah, we're back again this week with Part 2 or Part B of our series on pathways of education. And you lucky devils out there, you got to hear Part A last week, which was probably geared more towards my pathway, and then again, you lucky devils are privileged to hear my cohort this week, John, on his pathway, which is, we'll call it the non-college pathway, or the pathway of hard knocks, right?
Financially affordable, emotionally crippling route.
Man, that in itself is a good byline to this podcast.
How about that? Just the podcast in general.
Yeah. So last week, just to do a little quick recap, we talked about when you get a little bit older, like when you get into your late teens, you've got some choices you have to make as far as like if you want to continue going the route of higher education, you've got some choices of going to what we call the proper music schools, like the Berkeleys and the Eastmans and that type thing. And then you've also got the choice of possibly doing state music schools, which virtually every state will have some kind of a music school. And then we've got the music vocational tech schools that we talked about as well. And each one of those has their own financial burden we talked about, and also kind of their own unique aspects. And so after that, we decided we were going to go ahead and do Part B, which is the other end of that. That would be, hey, we're going to go ahead and talk about not going to school, but still pursuing a professional path towards being a full-time professional drummer. And so we're going to go ahead and talk about that today. And we'll let John talk about some of his personal experiences and some of the choices that he made as well. So kind of to start off on this, I'll kind of give us a jump off point as far as like one of the ways or one of the things that I've seen before in my teaching experience that kind of will lead us toward this path of not going to school. And one of those things is this, and I know, John, you will definitely want to expound upon this. One of the pet peeves that I've had, especially when teaching on the college level, is I've had some students that would kind of bristle and give me attitude, or at least tell me that when we were working on stuff that they didn't like or that they didn't want to work on, whether it be a stylistic thing or specific method type thing, they would be like, man, why do I have to work on this stuff? This is not what I want to do anyway. I came to school because I wanted to get better so I could just play with my band, or I want to, just play this particular style of music. And then invariably, I would tell them, well, look, if that's all you want to do, if you want to play with your band, you need to be out playing with your band. You're in so many ways, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice from the standpoint of coming to school and then torturing yourself with trying to learn all these different styles of music that you're really not that interested in. Mm-hmm. You're wasting time and you're wasting money, So I would literally tell these guys, look, if you're not interested in playing jazz, bossa novas, or Latin, just general Latin music, and then learning these different methods and learning music theory and all the other classwork, the things that go with it that we talked about in the previous podcast, you're doing yourself and your band a disservice. You need to be out there. You need to be tearing up the road, playing gigs, and trying to make it with your band. School will always be there.
That's true.
If you want to come back at a later time, they're not going to close up the doors of Berklee. They'll take your money just, when you're 24 just as well as when you're 18.
No question. It's interesting you touched on that teacher's dilemma of having a student, interested in one thing and not in another. And I certainly was that student, though not having much experience with a teacher of that ilk and in the level of like college education. I knew early on I had no earthly desire to learn mallets or timpani or to be rudimentally sound where I could be in a core.
Right.
None of that appealed to me whatsoever. I knew it in 7th grade. And although I had to have a little of that together through high school, concert band, marching band, it was like either A, we weren't playing at any level that was just beyond my natural abilities. I could read well enough to get through some things and all that. But it was, it just wasn't something that I wanted to invest time in. And that is something that you could not be more right about, in that, making an investment in higher education when you have no desire, although it's expected of you, and you must partake in that, those techniques and styles and different instruments. You gotta know, man. That's like, in this day and age now, the cost of school being what it is.
Yeah.
You gotta walk away from that, because you're not doing anyone a favor. Most importantly, yourself in the future. If you end up with debt in, learning a bunch of things you're not going to apply to anything in your career you want to focus on. So.
Yeah. And one thing I want to go ahead and just hammer home the point here is that we are saying in this podcast in particular that not going to school, but having an idea and a drive of what you want to do is as valid, absolutely as valid as going to college. We're not going to diminish this at all, because you and I both know a whole ton of drummers, great drummers, very influential drummers, never spent a second in any kind of college or institution of higher learning. So yeah, it's very, very important that everybody realizes that this is an extremely valid choice, and that if you know what you want to do, and you feel like that you've got the drive and the instinct to go forward with not going to school, then by all means you should do it. And like I said, I've encouraged it many times to different students.
Just recognizing in that individual.
Yep.
Yeah. That's huge, man. You can't overstate enough how miserable it is to be, and I can speak from experience because, full disclosure, I did, we joked about, I enrolled in college, and that was to appease some people and what, the pressure and what I thought I should do. But it was one of the most unhappiest times in my life. There were some extenuating circumstances that added to that misery, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to focus on was such a small part of that it breeded this horrific attitude in me. And that's something that I don't want to see people going through. If they really know in their heart, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to focus on, I'm not going to benefit from this. Follow that instinct, follow that gut instinct. And like you said, you can always go back to school. My mom graduated from college at 41 years old.
Right. Granted, it could be a little tougher to go back to school, after you've done that. But again, the option is there, absolutely, to go back and do it. Now, John, I know that you have, in the past, you've related a little quick story to me about there was, I can't remember if you said, though, that you were taking lessons or if it was at some kind of a competition or something, and that someone, it might have been John Von Olin.
It was. That
you had a discussion with him that kind of leads or kind of hammers home the point that we're talking about today. If you could just relate that quick story.
Well,
what the advice he gave you.
I played a little bit of background on me. I came through a legendary jazz program at my high school, and when I say legendary, that word's thrown around a lot. It is. It's like it's just legendary that so and so did this. But look, this is a public high school in a blue collar town, where a magic, incredible, once in a lifetime teacher put a product out every year that was just world class. I'm talking, in 30 years, maybe 25 of them, the band got a Downbeat Student Recording Award. So that gave us some great opportunity to be heard, because not only were we going to competitions and doing well, we were playing in front of judges at these competitions that were often, major jazz artists, just the cream of the crop educators. I mean, just, a lot of exposure to a lot of influential people. And in this particular case, we played a jazz festival, and it played during the day, and there was a judge, John Von Olin's a drummer, Cincinnati area, who is just kind of a legendary big band guy, has taught some
legends, yeah.
Absolutely.
And John, let me say one quick thing about this, to kind of also reinforce his point regarding the program that John was a part of. And I don't even know if I've ever told you this, but when I was in graduate school, the other graduate assistant was actually a product of that same.
Who was it?
J. Thomas Link.
I recognize that name.
Yeah, saxophone player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, he's actually still over in Memphis.
Okay.
Over there right now. But anyway, go right
ahead. There's an insane number of professional musicians that are still playing from that program. It's crazy. Side note, when people ask me about Jim Culbertson, he's the director at the school. His son is Brian Culbertson, the smooth jazz guru star. I try to describe him as Mr. Holland's hip jazz brother. that kind of rapport with students, that kind of love, that kind of influence, and leaning more towards a jazz thing, but huge, the biggest influence of my life, bar none.
Do you ever beat you on the head with a mallet?
Maybe emotionally on occasion, never physically. He was just above that. He was a pretty daunting figure, pretty big dude. He was like ex-athlete and all that, so he didn't really have to do much other than stare at you. But his intimidation wasn't his success. His motivation was his success. Yeah, and I want to make that perfectly clear. Anyway, back to the story. We played this festival. John Von Ohlen judged band after band that day. And I was friends with some of the musicians at the college where it was held. Went to a party that night, and John was there. And long story short, he recognized me and pulled me aside. He says, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to go to school, I guess." I'm sure he's looking at me like, "Boy, that was a sell."
Right, that's the thing to do. Right?
Sounds like you're really believing in that decision, kid. So he just says, "Look, I heard a bunch of people play today. I hear a bunch of people play all the time your age. And a lot of them should go to school and would benefit greatly from it for a lot of reasons. You shouldn't. You should go out and play, and you should go out and get your butt kicked, and you should go out and take every gig you possibly can take. And I don't know what it is about you, but I know that's what you should do." He didn't know me. He didn't know my attitude. He didn't know my tastes. For all he knew, I had a desire to be in, Santa Clara Vanguard or play in the Chicago Symphony. He didn't know. But instinctively, he just said, "No, here's what you need to do." And it really cemented my mindset to the detriment of some investment in school the next year and to my attitude about school, and sometimes even to my attitude towards professors.
Ultimately, though, it seemed to be the right advice, though, didn't it?
I don't think without question. I think without question it was the right advice. I know in my short exposure to the curriculum in college that the only thing it really did was kind of breed resentment in me, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. And it just wasn't where I needed to be. It's like telling a Bill Gates, "Man, you need to play football." No.
Right.
Look at him. No, no, you have to. That's what young American boys do. Well, no, not. My strengths and focus lie elsewhere. That's not right or wrong, like you pointed out. This is valid. And so what ended up happening, and I just think it's amazing, but there was a band from Champaign, Illinois called Champaign, had huge R&B hits, just 3 or 4 that just off the chart hits. And they broke up, and a couple guys from that band came home reeling at the breakup, started a band just playing. They were still writing stuff and all that, but playing covers and all that. And by the grace of God, I'm this green 19, 20-year-old kid. I go over and I have this incredible audition, which has always been something I could do. I remember back at Allstate, I remember having a better audition than the 2 guys from my junior and senior year that ended up in the McDonald's All-American Jazz Band. And for some reason, I come out of the audition, they're both like, "Oh, crap, man, I don't have a prayer. What'd you just do?" So auditioning was always something that just was, I happened to find a zen place and do well. So I went and auditioned for this band.
And by the way, John, was this after your stint in college?
Yes,
Well, this is a little bit after.
This is when I was just desperately looking for kind of a full-time gig to get out and start playing, which was some advice some other people had told me. You need to go out and play as much as you can. Get a regular working band.
That's going to be your education.
So there it was. I go in, and it was rough, man. It was rough. And the hardest lesson I ever learned was I made the mistake of putting people on pedestals I was playing with. And it ripped my head to shreds on a lot of levels. To the point I actually got fired at one point by them. And it devastated me. They go back to their old drummer. Shortly after that, they call me. No, come back. So as weird as that is, in like 2 months, I come back almost a new player because I'm confident that they want me back. They actually see me as the right choice, and it put me in a different place. And from there, just to give you kind of a brief but overview of my long history. From there, I was always able to play with the best musicians towns had to offer that I lived in, the best gigs and the best paying gigs, and just blessed in that sense. And I think a lot of it was having someone I looked up to tell me, you need to just go do this. Having some difficult growing pains in that school of hard knocks, but coming out of it in a better place, and coming out of it a better player, better prepared to focus on what I want to do. Those things have given me a 30-year career of making a living playing drums. Sometimes the gig is amazing and far-reaching and, worldwide, and sometimes it's you're playing around the corner at a bar, but nonetheless, prepared me for that.
Right. Well, the interesting thing about that also is you could say what you said there about sometimes it's a worldwide thing and sometimes it's around the corner. Well, I mean, Benny Colaiuta does that.
Yep.
Jack DeJohnette does that too.
That's very true.
You know what I mean? So, not to marginalize that aspect of it, that is the job that we do.
Sure.
I mean, that comes with the badge, so to speak,
It definitely is. And, I think sometimes we have this delusions of, we just think like someone like Vinny is a perfect example of like, oh, he's always just had a gig like Sting's.
Right.
Well, no. Because I'm sure there's nights he went and played at the Baked Potato for $40 and wasn't terribly excited about it for whatever reason, But that's what we do as players, And sometimes you're blessed to get to a point, and I've had periods in my career where I could kind of pick and choose, which was nice.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to go play bars right now. I'm doing some sessions. I got a nice paying gig here on Saturday night and a nice paying gig on Sunday morning. And I don't want to play bars was not an attitude ever in my book. Some people have that attitude. To me, it was like, I'm so lucky I can say, man, I just would rather not do that. And I want to make that perfectly clear. I've never had an attitude or thought I'm above something. To be blessed to not have to do something if you don't want is a different story.
Because, as we all know, that if you do have an attitude something or if you resent something, that's your quickest way to total misery.
Yeah.
I mean, absolute misery. Nobody, and again, we've said this before in previous podcasts, we didn't get in to do this, get into this business to be miserable. It's something that we enjoy doing, that we love doing.
Although we're great at it on occasion, thanks to the business.
Yeah.
We didn't get it. No, going back really quick, so I can't overstate enough. If you go this route, do everything you can, including getting on your knees and praying to God, like, please put me in gigs where everyone's better than me, where I'm just getting buried, where I'm overwhelmed. And in the moment, sometimes it can be a real drag, but man, search out situations where you're in over your head. Because I just grew in leaps and bounds in a couple situations early on where it was just invaluable. And if you can find those situations, do them. try to be the weakest player. Try to be, it's sometimes it's hard to find. Sometimes it's, it's just not in the cards, but don't shy away from that if the opportunity presents itself, because that I can personally say I grew more in those situations than any other. So that's something that if it presents itself again, embrace it. And
yeah, and the thing is, John, if you're astute enough to put yourself in that sort of situation, you've basically got a whole band full of teachers.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what it is. That's essentially what you got. You humble yourself enough to put yourself in that position to work hard enough to get the respect of those guys, and man, they will teach you a ton.
That's so true. And another thing that there's another thing I think when we talk about right and wrong, this approach is not necessarily right or wrong, like higher education versus just going out and playing. I know in my case, and I kind of come from the last generation where it was like really hammered in your head, like, man, you got to have it together, like across the board if you want to work. Like have your jazz playing together, have your reading together, have, even though I didn't go to school, the program I came up in, fortunately, kind of exposed me enough of that I'm a pretty decent reader. I could get through some pretty heady things without, anybody hurting themselves and all that. But, there is that mindset, and I never think it's a bad thing to have it together in a lot of ways, because it presents opportunities as a working player that, you might be able to make more money that way or whatever. Having different styles again and all that. It's not the be all and end all. If you want to just be a total groove pig and you want to just focus on that and that's your thing, there's plenty of opportunity for that too. That's okay too. Focus your energies on your heart, focus your energies on your desires, have goals, and have, just have a belief in yourself in this path, because it's not going to be easy.
Right.
And
well, with this again being one very valid pathway as far as getting out there and beating up the road and playing gigs, playing with better musicians, there's there are a few other options that you can take as well without having to go to school. And one of the ones that we both like a lot is just seeking out a really good private teacher as well. Mm-hmm. And you can be, especially if you live in a large city where there's virtually every large city, there is a decent music scene, or at least there's some kind of industry in there that will have good teachers that live in that area and work in that area. You can also somewhat tailor your decision as far as like to what kind of styles or what kind of focus you want to learn on to finding that particular teacher. Mm. Like, for example, if you feel like you need to work on your technique, you can find a guy that is known for, good technical teaching and technical skills. If you need to find somebody that can help you out with jazz or brushes or something, there's a guy that can do that and whatnot. So that's another excellent way to focus your attention and not spend a ton of money also, mm-hmm. is finding a good, reputable local teacher. And for that much, even if you're out on the road, something that I've done, and I bet you've done it too as well, is if you're in another city and you're going to be there for a little bit of time, you can find somebody that's well known or that's well respected in that city, get a lesson in with those guys as well. But that's another one of my big tips that I tell everybody is like, take advantage of the situation that you're in, the city that you're in, and try to find somebody, if you need that help, try to find somebody else out there that can kind of tailor to your needs as far as private lessons.
Awesome stuff. I know when you're talking about, in a major metropolitan area, you can find a teacher that can help you, focus on what you want. In my case, I grew up somewhere where I had very few lessons, and probably the best teacher I had was maybe the guy who was a senior in high school when I was in 7th or 8th grade. You know, it's like pretty limited in many ways. And it, you know, couple that with not having a strong desire to learn other than listening to records and trying to emulate it, which was a big part of my growth and my development. Now, I don't think there's a whole lot of excuse at this point, because we talked about earlier, you know, with the internet now, I mean, not only is there insane amounts of world-class free lessons on YouTube, mind you, there's plenty that aren't, but, you know, you can put it out there like, hey, I need some reputable people, you know, knowledgeable guys. Show me some things that you found online that have helped you, that you really feel is good teaching and good methods and all that. And on top of that too, you know, there's a lot of guys now, you can do lessons via the internet with, you know, Skype lessons, and there's, you know, there's paid sites now with reputable teachers where you can really grow a great deal. So it's incredible the opportunities now that younger players have. If you're not going to go this route of higher education, you can still have lessons, highly focused lessons from very qualified people for minimal investment, and take advantage of that. I mean, I say that in that I could go back and do that. I'm lazy and old, but really, there's so much opportunity now that there's not a lot of excuses. If you know, I've known a couple of people, I can't afford to go to school, so, you know, even if they wanted to, well, okay, here's some options for you that you could get fed some of that. You know, so there's definitely some amazing things now available to any drummer, not just young drummers. It's just incredible what's available.
Man, I'll tell you what I like doing with some of my students. I'll have them working out of certain methods. Like I've got some kids that are, you know, wanting to go off to music school. Some guys don't. They want to do what we're talking about here. But what I would do to kind of help tailor their lessons and give them just a little extra oomph as far as like something they can kind of take home, so to speak. If we're working on particular methods, like let's just take, for example, like a snare drum method, like a Wilcoxon kind of book. Man, I have found on YouTube, I have found some people on there that will record themselves just playing these solos. And I mean ripping them perfect, playing them with a click, playing them perfectly. There's one person in particular, there's this one girl that has recorded an entire series. I don't even know how far she's gone, man, with these solos. And they're perfect. I mean, they're perfect. And so I'll tell these kids, I'll be like, well, you know, solo 18, I know there's a few things on there that you may not be completely and totally, you know, sure of. You know, once you get home, you might be, you know, the phrasing on it or how you're supposed to execute this particular role. I said, go on YouTube and check out this person. And they're right. You know what I mean? And so if you think about it, John, again, you can incredibly tailor your educational experience without going to college by taking some private lessons, kind of adding to those private lessons some very good quality online materials, you know, and hopefully also your teacher will be able to point you in the direction of where the good stuff is on there. Because like you mentioned before, it's not all good. You've got to know where to look, right? Because there's some stuff out there that's not good at all.
No
Expert Village. And then...
That's false advertising.
And then... if you've got a good teacher, you've got some good online material or just overall good media, whether it be DVD, whatnot, and then you combine that with some good on-the-job, on-the-road style experience, man, let me tell you, you can have a very positive outcome with those different things. You can have some great things happen.
Yeah, I love that that stuff's available just because sometimes, like if you're in higher education, sometimes you find the perfect teacher there and it works out great and you grow in leaps and bounds and that person was meant to teach you. Sometimes not. You know, in my case, in the short few lessons I had, you know, the guy at the college I went to was really locked into Japanese marimba stuff, but you know, no desire to play drum set, and so it just was a bad fit. And you know, there's the beauty of the online thing is there's a good fit out there for you, I'm sure. You know, like there's definitely, even down to like the sound of someone has, you know, you relate to them. A good teacher, but their sound is similar to what you hear in your head. That's huge, man. That person's probably going to benefit you more than the guy over here that's a little more locked into this thing and, you know, heavy-handed maybe versus a light touch, all kinds of things. You know, what do you want to be? It's all out there. And I just think that if you really want to grow, you know, and you don't think school's for you, you owe it to yourself to look at content.
Well, absolutely. You know, again, for the motivated individual that doesn't want to go that route of college, it's so much easier to explore. Like, for example, if you take a private lesson, if that teacher's not exactly what you're looking for, or if you've gone as far as you want to go with that person, you don't have to deal with withdrawing from that school and transferring to another school and have to, oh my God, I hope these credits work, and transfer over to this, that type thing. So there's a beauty to the simplicity of this as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
Yeah,
I wouldn't even think of that.
Right, because I mean, there's nothing worse than investing a couple of years in a place, right? Because I actually know there's a couple of friends of mine that did this, that went for a few years to one school, and then you have to, you know, you want to continue on in school. You figured out the first place is not the right place. You want to go to another place. You found this new place you want to go to that's the right fit. Then you find out you're almost starting over again as far as like college credits and, you know, that type thing. Whereas opposed, that if you don't want to go that route, you know, if you just stop lessons with a guy in particular, you know, to try to find somebody else, there's no harm, no foul there.
Right.
You know, it's a little less messy.
Even, it's funny you say that, even when someone will ask me about their kids, you know, I want to get my kids into lessons. And oftentimes, I mean, some of it's political, but oftentimes I'll give them like 2 or 3 different names, you know, of teachers. You know, I have to be mindful of like location. Granted, like I can't. It's a little difficult for me to recommend you to someone that lives here.
Right.
If they want to make it work, cool. But I always kind of tell them like, hey, here's a few names. Why don't you take a lesson from each one and see what clicks? Don't just get locked into one thing. And I can think of 2 instances where they just thank me endlessly. Like, wow, I'm so glad we did that because it's just the perfect fit with so-and-so. And everything about it has just been, you know, positive, and they're just really benefiting from it. And so that's cool stuff. You know, you definitely speak wisdom in that, you know, checking different people out and finding it. It's hard, as you know, you've had enough teachers too, you know, it's really hard and sometimes you do compromise a little bit, but.
Well, you know, though, John, to that point, there have been a couple of teachers that I've had, because I've been one of those guys. I've studied with a bunch of different people, and there's been a couple of like, we'll call them celebrity style drummers that I've had some lessons with, that I'm just going to straight up say, man, some of the advice and some of the information that I got from them was not very good.
That surprised me.
Yeah, but we'll talk about another topic for another podcast. One of the guys that I had a couple lessons with has completely and totally changed the kind of the theories or sort of the concepts that they were teaching 25 years ago.
Interesting.
You know, so again, to that point, you've got, again, if you study with several different drummers, you're almost going to find at times that there are certain things that you learn from these guys that you don't want to do.
That's great. Yeah, that's very true.
You know what I mean? In other words, you can sometimes get lessons from people that it's like, well, I might have spent $75 on this lesson or however long you take from them, but at least I learned something from them, and it's what I learned was what I don't want to do.
See, I get that from listening to players.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Oftentimes, I don't say that snarky or
right.
I'm like, oh yeah, that's not.
Yeah.
Obviously that person thinks that's translating well, and maybe to their band or their audience, or maybe it is. To me and my tastes and my instincts, and what I want to be as a player, which I'm always thinking about when I'm listening. Mm-hmm. I'm the kind of person that tries to see good in other players, and
right.
I mean, look, my best friends are drummers. I mean, who are we kidding? There's and in that you have to embrace other people's playing, and it's best to not be, jealous in some crippling way of other people. You can be envious in certain respects, but yeah, trying to find that. I want to jump back to the story about John Von Ohlen real quick and just kind of laugh at myself once again. The story goes, Jeff Hamilton, who was a protege of John's in some ways, and John was an influence on him coming up. He was playing in town, and a bunch of us show up, and afterwards there's about 8 or 9 of us hanging out, and a good friend of ours says, "John, you should tell your John Von Ohlen story, man." And I'm kind of like, I had a couple cocktails. I'm like, hey, yeah, sure. Everybody knows John. This will be great. So I start telling a story about him telling me, and you shouldn't go to school, man. This is BS. Blah, 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 blah. And about 4 sentences in, I kind of look around. And I'm like looking at every one of my friends and peers and Jeff Hamilton, like all have, significant education.
Right.
And I'm kind of like, I think I probably turned pale and, like maybe passed out. Like, I'm such an idiot, like I'd laugh. I just laugh and laugh. And I would venture to guess no one remembers that. But to me, it was like, the most horrifying
I think
scenario.
I was there, John, and I don't remember that.
Yeah, see? How we build things up. But yeah, I'm thinking like, man, these educated cats just are going to think I'm the biggest jerk ever.
Well, though, man, let me say this. On the other side of that, being on the other side of the table literally from you right now, the sentiment that you just had there as far as like, maybe having some sort of jealousy or at least having a different perspective, that, these educated guys think I'm a freaking buffoon. Let me tell you, it works both ways also from the other side of the table, that there are times that a lot of guys that have master's degrees and doctorates will a lot of times think to themselves and even tell other people, wonder what would happen if I hadn't done this. What if I had just gone out and played gigs? What if I had just done this? So it works both ways.
Yeah. It also kind of parallel to that, there's a contingent that just is, oh, you went to school, oh, you got a master's, you can't, how could that be cool? You probably feel like a stiff board, and your head's so locked into your academics that, I'm just a player, man. I'm born to do it. I'm organic. I've run across that a lot. I fortunately know a scary amount of guys with a scary amount of education that are as greasy and funky and as just down and dirty as anybody I know. So that theory is all a bunch of hogwash. But there is definitely a thread within certain players, like, the educated guys, they you can hear it in their playing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, what? Okay, sure, man. My friend Wayne is highly educated, and if you heard him play drum set, you'd be just like, this beast is just funky as it gets, So it's like, shut up with all that. But And educated guys, definitely. Oh, look at the Neanderthal over there. Well, sad reality is there's probably some gigs I'm going to get that you might not.
Right.
Or where my head is, or how I communicate, or what my background and reputation is. I played with so-and-so, or I'm known for this thing, or,
right.
I'm benefiting from that versus I have a master's degree from Miami. So it's a double-edged sword, and I think it's all a bunch of crap.
It is.
It comes down to when you sit down and play, is it working or not?
That's exactly
And even
right.
then, though, there could be an argument that, well, I don't think it's working. Well, I think it's amazing. So
right. Well,
it's like, come on, man.
That's why we kind of named this little 2-part series Pathways of Education, because all these different pathways ultimately should lead to the same place.
I agree. With
You're
the
either gonna
exception
play-
of if you want to teach at a high level.
Right.
The goal is to play, right?
Right. That's exactly right. The pathways should lead to being a player.
Yeah. And nobody that gets their master's degree is saying, man, I only want to play like regional pop symphony gigs.
Right.
Where the conductor is conducting and I have to play 16th note fills and play stiff. No, man, shut up about all that. No.
Absolutely. So, again, to kind of recap what we talked about today, being a fellow who's made a choice that you don't necessarily want to endure school, you don't want to have to pay for it, you just don't have the desire to do that. There are plenty, and I mean plenty, of valid routes that you can take to get you from point A to point B to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
You just make the decision on what you want to do. You can. We've talked about private lessons. We've talked about media, whether it be online media, physical media, books, blah, 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 studying different styles with private teachers. And then, of course, there's always going out and just doing it. You combine all that stuff, there's plenty of validity, and it can get you right where you want to be.
Yep. And the truth is, for every highly educated, successful drummer, there's a guy who put on some records and learned to play and is equally as successful. There's no right or wrong, man, and you can't argue with the fact that so and so, Vinny Colaiuta, he went 4 years and this and that and studied and then you have Ringo.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like, look, man, it's just, you find it in yourself who you want to be as a player and try to make sound decisions in what your goals are and what's the best path to get there.
Absolutely. And to kind of segue our way into our segment for the day, you mentioned something about, and I guess it was sort of implied when we were talking about media and whatnot. We talked about, or you just mentioned about playing the records. I think everybody does, regardless of what path you take, you're going to end up playing to some records. And one of the things that we talked about doing this week for our segment is talking about great live recordings where we have some just exemplary drumming on there. I think it's a great topic to broach.
Well, I know live records, interestingly enough, are kind of not as altogether common these days. We do see some live performances more so than live records, but when we were growing up, there were some hugely successful and influential live records. And I mean, the Allman Brothers and Aretha Fillmore records, and you had
Peter Frampton.
Frampton Comes Alive, huge. Johnny
Kiss Alive.
Cash, Kiss Alive, yeah. There's James Brown at the Apollo. It's just insanely great magic moments captured, and we all lived and breathed these records, and learned a great deal because you're really hearing something that applies to most of us. And that is most of the things we're going to do is live. So hearing someone and what's working, what's not, how it feels, how they're controlling a band, how they're, all of these things. Live records were a big influence on me, and with the seminal ones and the obvious ones, I kind of wanted to touch base on a few that some of our friends will roll their eyes, be like, yeah, of course, dude,
right,
whatever. But man, there's some maybe not. A few examples are one record that I just could never get enough of. I almost kind of consider it like the live Bible of R&B drumming is Rufus and Chaka Khan live stomping at the Savoy. John Robinson, just proof is in the pudding, man. He's just killing it. It's live. This is no Pro Tools edits. It's like it's on, and he absolutely murders it.
Yeah, he really lifted up a crappy band, didn't he?
Yeah, the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Good Lord.
But he rose to the occasion, as we drummers always do.
Absolutely.
But nonetheless, man, it's stunning. And what's really crazy about that record is whenever I revisit it, I just realize, like, God, man, he's so much more of an influence on me than I ever admit. And it's not that I'm embarrassed by it. I just kind of like, I'm such a Picaro guy and an Al Jackson guy and Ringo guy, But, man, that dude's right there. It's just, and think about all the hits he played, too. It's in our DNA.
I was going to say, not to jump off on a John Robinson tangent right and everything, but, man, how many guys had about a 6 or 7 year run from like about 1979 to like around 86 or 87? Some of the recordings he played on,
just as big as it gets.
Oh, yeah. And it's like you said.
If he just would have done Quincy's records,
right? I mean, the subliminal aspect of even records you didn't know that he played on.
Absolutely.
You listen to it and it's like, man, there's some just ridiculously great, solid, great feeling playing, man, this guy played on.
Yeah, he's a monster. So your turn. We'll just bounce back and forth a little bit and throw some out there.
In our previous podcast, one of the things you talked about, you said that I was known for the longest time as being like one of the jazz guys and stuff, and then all of a sudden, you said you've totally reinvented yourself over like the last 14 or 15 years into something. Well, now I'm going to go back on my throw back into the face of reason here and convention. I'm going to go back to one of my jazz.
Don't forget where you come from, Bill.
Right. Let me tell you, a record that it really has gotten lost because, there's just so many jazz records have come out, it costs nothing to make them, and they put them out by the dozen. But there is a record it's now roughly 20 years old that is astounding. It's a Tommy Flanagan live record that was done on his birthday. This is back in the late 90s. It's called Sunset and the Mockingbird, and Lewis Nash is playing drums on it. Man, it talk about the Bible of R&B drumming. Man, it is the Bible of piano, trio, bop, hard bop playing. And one thing that's kind of cool about it, and that's kind of unique about it as well, is that it doesn't have a lot of just like beat up standards on it. There's some kind of unique tunes that are on that record as well, with some weird forms and stuff. There's a couple tunes there's a kind of an unsung trombonist composer, a guy named Tom McIntosh, and Flanagan plays 2 or 3 of his songs on there. Some of the highlights on that record is there's a song called Bird Song. Lewis Nash trades some I think it's 4s on that one, and he's just out of his mind. There's that Tom McIntosh tune called The Cupbearers. This very weird form in Flanagan and Lewis Nash. Lewis Nash plays brushes when he's trading on this one. Trades some of the different. It's not necessarily 4s or 8s because of the weird form. Mm-hmm. He's a brush god on there. And I think there's a Thad Jones. There's an up-tempo tune on there called Let's. That, again, he's just amazing on. The recording quality is very good because it was done back in the, like I said, the late 90s. And so that's my big pick for the day is
Awesome.
that not many people, because again, so many records have been put, so many jazz records, because it costs basically nothing to put them out. But boy, this is one that absolutely deserves further attention.
It's captured the magic.
Absolutely.
Okay. My next one that I beg you to check out, and it's just a standard in a lot of people's minds in the R&B world, but Donny Hathaway Live is a record that the most fascinating thing to me about it, besides Donny's singing, which is otherworldly, is Fred White is playing drums.
He's left-handed, man. That can't be.
He's not only left-handed. Fred White, by the way, is Maurice's younger brother who played drums with Earth, Wind & Fire for years. Mm-hmm. He is, I think he's 17. He started with Donny when he was 16. I think on this record he's 17 years old. Willie Weeks is the bass player on it. But he's 17 years old. And it's just a magic record. There's just, they do cool covers, and it's just a band kind of in the zone. Some of the New York guys, Cornell Dupree, and some of those guys, like Stuff guys, are involved. But it's a fascinating record, and I revisit it often. But 17, did I mention he was 17?
Yeah, 17.
And some people might correct me and say 16. I didn't look at the birth date, but.
And John, just to clarify, this is the album. It's just called Donny Hathaway Live.
Yeah, and it's
recorded
actually
in San Francisco. Is that right?
Actually, it was the Troubadour in L.A., I think.
Or okay,
but also maybe Bitter End. The other there's two,
several different locations. Yeah,
it's just two. It's two locations. I think. I'm pretty sure it's Troubadour and Bitter End. Mostly the same band, definitely the same rhythm section. So it's kind of in a tour they recorded at a couple places, but that you'll know that Donny's got a big oversized news cap, newsboy hat on, and it just called Live, and it probably says on the jacket, recorded at, if it's at two places, this is the one. Killing.
One thing in particular about that record also is it being a live recording from the early 70s. The fidelity on there is very good.
Fantastic.
As well. Yeah, you can really hear things very well, on that recording as well.
There's plenty that weren't, and that one is, and I think that's helped it withstand the test of time as well.
Yeah.
It's a good sounding record, and there's something to be said for that.
Right. And the last one that we want to bring up today is one that John actually reminded me about. And I listened to a little bit of it today, there's a record from the early 60s.
I think, maybe mid-64-ish, maybe.
It's Frank Sinatra with Count Basie Band. It's Sinatra Live at the Sands with the inimitable Sonny Payne playing drums on it.
Just a rock star. It's incredible.
John, I'm going to give John the credit. He coined him the John Bonham of big band drumming.
It's true.
That's good, man. That's really good.
Just swings hard, sounds huge, and it's just like, I'm the guy. Everybody just hold on.
I encourage everybody to try to find some video. If you haven't seen Sonny Payne before, he was also one of the consummate showmen of his time as well. And just one thing I was telling John is that on all those 60s Basie recordings, and one of the ones that I really like, it's not live, but shares some of the same DNA, is there's a record, I think it was done a few years after that with Ella Fitzgerald. It's Ella and Basie, and boy, there's a kind of strut that rhythm section has. That tempo, that groove, that feel is just, man, you just stand up straight and just strut, man, when you hear those guys play. It's fantastic, man.
Yeah, you hear it. That Sinatra album is, first and foremost, what kind of ups the ante is Quincy Jones did all the arrangements, and they're kind of souped up versions of some of Sinatra's standards. Very, very true to the original arrangements, but just a little more aggressive. Maybe they're taking something up tempo wise, or up an octave on certain things and all that. But I mean, that in itself is going to push you into the stratosphere. But man, there's so much swagger on this record. It's scary. And it could have been just one of those three entities alone had that swagger. Frank in his prime, mid-60s, was, like I told you, his voice had a little more grit in it. And he just was so just in control of everything at that point, in Vegas especially. Basie's band, to me, the mid-60s bands it was just tighter and funkier and just so, just like this, I don't know, there's just so much swagger. That's the only word I can think of.
There's a certain machismo, man,
absolutely,
to that band. You know, like the confidence, you know, machismo, swagger, strut.
Yes. It was kind of like if you had, you know, in like a small group, kind of like Blakey's thing. That similar kind of thing, you know, but
there's some grease on it, man.
Yes,
yeah.
and it's kind of dirty, but still just focused and grooving hard, and you can just feel coming off the instruments like, man, we are the bomb, man. You're gonna dig this whether you like it or not, and then add Quincy's arrangement in the mix. But you can just feel that particular record, though, more than any live record I know. You can just feel like how I said earlier, like even the third trombone player's got his just peacocking up his chest out like, we are going to bring it like you never heard it. This record is stunning, man.
Right. And that's also when Vegas was Vegas.
Yes.
It wasn't Disneyland Vegas back then.
No.
That was when it was adult Vegas. So it was sort of Vegas itself was at its peak and kind of strutting as well at that time.
Yeah, it was like the perfect storm, man.
Yeah.
And you know, political correctness be damned, like just it's such a stunning record captured at the perfect time with the perfect people. And Frank is a star, but Sonny Payne is standing behind him saying, "Don't forget me," the whole time, and not in a bad way.
Right.
Not in a distracting way, but like, man, I'm here.
Sonny Payne could set up some kicks, couldn't he? Woo. Woo. Well, I mean, he for those folks out there, you know, you've heard us mention Mel Lewis before. This guy's sort of the anti-Mel Lewis, and and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that if you're not exactly into the subtleties, shall we say, of Mel Lewis, Sonny Payne liked to express himself
very much.
You know, whenever he played, and that even aside from the way that he played the fills and set up the kicks, and just the way that he played time with that band, it goes all the way down to the tuning of the drums and the sound of his kit, his cymbals and whatnot, which is really, you could almost say that he's like the polar, he's the 180-degree opposite almost, you know, from Mel Lewis. He borrows a little more from the Buddy style of things, but even with more grease, as you like to say.
Yeah, it's by all means that, you know, just sheer power and I mean, he definitely had his hands together, his chops together, no question about that. You know, in some ways, I think he was, as an ensemble player, in some ways, I think he might have even been a little more selfless than Buddy, which in that band is because sometimes, man, just the arrangements are the star in the Basie band. That's one of the beauty thing about Ellington and Basie's bands is always like, you know, as hard swinging as they were, especially Basie's band and the hard swing thing, arrangements still really stood out as just, there were a lot of big bands, man.
Oh, yeah.
Why do you think a couple stood out? Because it was just the stunning magic of a good arranger.
That's right. You'll have somebody, whether in like that Basie band, whether it be Foster or Jones, that arranged that stuff. They knew the personnel in that band, and you're going to arrange to it. You're going to arrange to it. You play to that strength.
Obviously, Duke
did
as well, and that's why we still talk about those bands.
Yep.
You know, and there were a lot of good big bands, but there were a few exceptional ones, and I don't think there's any more exceptional than the mid-'60s bassies, man. And you put the King out front.
Yeah.
It's so on. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Hey, I guess did anybody get the impression we liked that record? Because I didn't want to undersell it. So just in case.
Do you want to do a part B on that record next week?
I could.
Yeah. Well, I think we've done our damage for this week.
Yep. I agree. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. And folks, as we've talked about before in the past, please let your feelings be known. You can contact us at our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast. And you can also get us at twitter.com/DW Groovecast. No relation to the drum company. But please send us your thoughts, your ideas, your questions. We're going to be opening up a segment here very soon where we're going to do listener mail, where we'll be answering some questions. So, again, we appreciate you listening to us. And tune back every week. We'll be getting some new content to you. So until then, we're signing off. We'll see you later.
Have a good one.